The soft hum of fluorescent lights filled the studio as I stepped inside. The air carried a faint scent of developing chemicals, mingled with the sharp tang of linseed oil from the half-finished canvases leaning against the walls. I had been here before, but this time, the atmosphere felt charged, every shadow pregnant with secrets. The photographer, Damien, was hunched over his desk, flipping through a portfolio of vibrant landscapes and candid portraits. His studio exuded a bohemian charm, walls plastered with black and white photos of wistful models, scattered rolls of film, and an antique camera perched like a sentinel on the corner shelf. He looked up as I approached, his lips curving into a cautious smile. "Mark, good to see you again." "Damien." I nodded, trying to ignore the tightening knot in my stomach. My fingers curled around the edges of the envelope I carried, a token of curiosity and betrayal, though Damien didn't know that. Yet. "I assume this isn't a social call." His voice was casual, but his eyes flicked to the envelope in my hands. He had always been perceptive. "No," I admitted, scanning the room. My wife's favorite shawl, a deep plum color, was draped over the back of a chair. The sight of it sent a jolt through me, a silent confirmation of the suspicions that had driven me here. Damien followed my gaze and leaned back in his chair. "She's not here," he said. "Beth left a few hours ago." "Something wrong?" "Just some things I need to understand." Damien raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "I'm not sure how I can help." I set the envelope on the desk between us. "You might want to take a look at this first." Inside were photographs, moments frozen in time, intimate in ways that made my blood boil. My heart hammered in my chest as Damien reached for the envelope, his movements deliberate. As he began flipping through the pictures, his face betrayed nothing. I waited, my pulse pounding in my ears, for the facade to crack. "You've got something to say," I finally prompted, my voice colder than I intended. He looked up, locking eyes with me. "What do you want to know?" But before I could answer, the door behind me creaked open, flooding the studio with a sliver of light. I turned, the weight of everything unsaid filling the space between us. The door creaked open wider, but no one entered. A draft swept into the room, tugging at the edges of the photographs on Damien's desk. The faint sound of rain drumming against the pavement outside filtered in, an uninvited metronome to my growing unease. "You're making this into something bigger than it is," Damien said, his voice calm but laced with something I couldn't quite place, guilt. Defensiveness? I glanced at the photographs again. They weren't just images, they were accusations, glaring truths captured in shades of gray. The sight of Beth's familiar smile in another man's world felt like a punch to the chest every time my eyes landed on them. Damien stood and moved toward the window, his tall frame backlit by the dim, cloud-filtered light. "Beth." Before he could finish, my hand shot out, knocking over the envelope. The photos spilled across the desk like a deck of cards in a losing hand. "Beth what?" I demanded, stepping closer. My voice reverberated through the studio, louder than I'd intended. Damien's jaw tightened, and he opened his mouth as if to respond, but something else caught my attention, a subtle shift behind me. I turned sharply just as the lamp on the desk beside us wobbled. Time slowed. The antique lamp, one of those heavy iron bases with a glass dome shade, teetered precariously on the edge. Before either of us could react, it toppled, crashing to the floor with a deafening shatter. Glass fragments flew, glittering in the soft studio light like shards of a broken dream. The bulb burst, leaving the corner of the room cloaked in shadow. Damien flinched and instinctively stepped back, his hands half raised as if in surrender. "Easy, Mark," he said. I stared at the broken lamp, the sound of its fall still echoing in my ears. It felt like an omen, a visual representation of everything breaking apart. The sharp scent of scorched filament joined the room's cocktail of chemicals and paint. "Beth trusted you," I said, my voice low now, waited. "And you?" "I never wanted this," Damien interrupted, his tone firm but tinged with something that sounded like regret. Whatever you think you know, it's more complicated than that. Complicated? I took a step forward, my shoes crunching on shards of glass. You betrayed me. She betrayed me. What's complicated about that? Damien's eyes darted to the door behind me. I turned instinctively, expecting Beth to walk in, or maybe even the ghost of my former trust, but the doorway was empty. The rain outside seemed louder now, as if the world beyond the studio was protesting along with me. When I looked back at Damien, his expression had shifted, hardening. If you want answers, Mark, you'll need to hear the whole story. But you're not going to like it. His words hung in the air like a challenge, daring me to push further. The studio was eerily quiet after the crash, the sound of rain now a muffled backdrop. I crouched, brushing shards of glass aside with my hand. The jagged fragments caught the dim light, small, cruel mirrors of the fractures in my life. Damien remained where he was, his silhouette dark against the window. He seemed taller in the dimness, more imposing, but maybe that was my anger casting him as larger than life. I'm listening, I said finally, straightening and fixing my gaze on him. Damien hesitated, running a hand through his dark hair. Beth came here, often. I know, I said, cutting him off. I saw the texts. The late nights she couldn't explain. The work projects that didn't add up. My voice tightened, each word feeling like it clawed its way out. Just get to the part where you tell me why. He exhaled, stepping closer to his desk. Carefully, he began gathering the spilled photographs, as if organizing them might make the chaos between us more manageable. It started with the portraits, he said, almost absently. She wanted something special for your anniversary, a gift. She said she felt invisible, like a part of herself had been swallowed by routine. So you gave her attention, I snapped. It wasn't like that, Mark, Damien said, his tone sharpening. He placed the photos back into the envelope, leaving one out, a black and white shot of Beth, her eyes downcast, her expression unguarded. Vulnerable. Then what was it like? I stepped closer. She was lost. He held up the photo. She said you couldn't see her anymore. She wasn't accusing you, she was grieving. That's rich, I said, my laugh bitter. She betrays me, and now I'm supposed to feel sorry for her. She didn't plan for this to happen, Damien said. Neither did I. Stop, I growled, my hands balling into fists. Don't you dare try to make this sound noble. You let it happen. You let her. The words choked off as my gaze fell back to the photograph. It was one I hadn't seen before. There was something haunting about her expression, as though she was pleading with someone, or herself. Damien set the photo down on the desk, stepping back. She wanted to feel alive again, Mark. That's all she ever said to me. She thought I could help her find whatever it was she'd lost. And you obliged, I said, my voice hollow. Because what? You're her savior. Because she wasn't just your wife to me, Damien said, the words quiet but cutting. She was a friend. And I failed her as much as you did. The anger boiled over before I could stop it. I slammed my hand onto the desk, sending a stack of negatives tumbling to the floor. Don't put us in the same category. I loved her. I still love her. You. The door creaked behind me, the sound slicing through the tension. I turned sharply, my breath catching. Beth stood in the doorway, rain dripping from her hair, her eyes wide as they darted between Damien and me. She began, her voice faltering. Mark, I didn't know you'd be here. Her presence was a fresh wound, the reality of her betrayal standing mere feet away. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stared at her, every ounce of my anger, hurt, and confusion bubbling to the surface. We were just getting to your part in all this, I said, my voice icy. Beth stepped inside, her arms wrapped around herself. I came to explain. Then explain. My voice was a whip crack, leaving no room for excuses. Her eyes flickered to Damien, and I could see the silent exchange pass between them, a thread of understanding I was no longer part of. You have no idea how hard this is for me, she said finally, her voice breaking. But you deserve the truth, Mark. Both of you do. The studio seemed to hold its breath, the weight of her words drawing all the air from the room. Beth hesitated in the doorway, her fingers clutching the fabric of her rain-soaked coat. The air between us grew heavy, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my temples. Damien stayed silent, leaning against the desk, his expression a mask of unreadable calm. Go on, Beth, I said, the words sharp enough to cut. Tell me the truth you've so generously decided I deserve. She flinched but took a step closer. It wasn't supposed to be this way, Mark, she began, her voice trembling. I came to Damien because I felt like I was losing myself. It had nothing to do with you, not at first. Not at first, I repeated bitterly, the phrase souring on my tongue. And then what? You found yourself in his bed instead of ours? Beth shook her head quickly. It wasn't like that. Damien's voice cut through the tension. Beth, stop. He's not going to believe anything but the full story. Her eyes darted to him, her cheeks coloring. I'm trying to explain. I slammed my hand on the edge of the desk, making both of them flinch. Then explain, I snapped. Because right now, all I see is you standing there, drenched, caught in a lie that's been rotting our marriage from the inside. Beth's shoulders slumped. I started with the portraits, she said, her voice quieter now. I wanted to feel seen. Every time Damien took a photo of me, I felt like I could breathe again. And when did breathing turn into betrayal? I asked coldly. She bit her lip, her gaze dropping to the floor. Damien and I never slept together. I let out a bitter laugh. You expect me to believe that? It's the truth, Damien interjected. His voice was steady, and I hated him for it. It never went that far. Convenient, I spat. So you were content to play the tortured artist while my wife played the muse? Is that supposed to make this better? It wasn't just about the photos, Beth said, her words rushing out now, as if she feared I'd leave before she could finish. I told him things I couldn't tell you. About how I felt. About us. Us. I took a step forward, and she shrank back. You mean the us you destroyed the second you walked in here? I didn't mean to destroy anything, she cried. I just wanted to feel alive again, Mark. To feel something different. I didn't know how to tell you. So you told him. I jabbed a finger toward Damien, my voice brimming with disgust. He listened, she whispered. Damien spoke up, his tone still maddeningly even. She wasn't looking for another man. She was looking for herself. I didn't see it for what it was until it was too late. I laughed again, a bitter, hollow sound. How poetic. And yet somehow, you still managed to make her yours, didn't you? Beth's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't like that, she said, shaking her head. You don't understand. Damien helped me, but it was never physical. What's this, then? I demanded, grabbing one of the photos and thrusting it toward her. It was one of the most intimate of the set, her eyes half closed, her lips slightly parted, a flush of vulnerability on her cheeks. She stared at it, her tears spilling over. I see myself in that picture, she said softly. I hadn't seen that woman in years. And what about me, Beth? My voice broke despite myself. Where do I fit into your grand rediscovery? Beth's sobs became heavier, but she said nothing. Damien stepped forward, his hand outstretched as if to placate me. Mark, this isn't the way. I turned on him, my anger boiling over. You stay out of this. You had no right to interfere in my marriage. Beth's voice broke through the chaos, trembling but clear. Mark, I never stopped loving you. I came here because I wanted to fix myself, so I could fix us. The weight of her words hung in the air, but they only deepened the ache in my chest. My gaze flicked between her tear-streaked face and Damien's grim expression. The truth she offered was a puzzle with missing pieces, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to find the rest. Beth's words echoed in the studio, their weight settling over the room like a thick fog. My mind scrambled to piece together what she was saying, but the fragments refused to fit. The photos, the nights she'd spent here, the look in Damien's eyes, it all felt too damning. I stepped back, dragging a hand down my face. You wanted to fix yourself? I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. You thought lying and sneaking around would somehow bring us closer. Beth wiped at her cheeks, her voice trembling as she spoke. I didn't think you'd understand. You're always so strong, so steady. I thought if I told you I felt lost, you'd think I was weak, or worse, ungrateful. Ungrateful, I echoed, the word burning like acid. For what? A husband who's loved you. Who's never looked at another woman the way I've looked at you. She sobbed harder, her hands shaking as she reached for me. I know I was wrong, Mark. But I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to find a way back to the person I used to be, the person you fell in love with. By turning to him. I gestured sharply toward Damien, who stood silent, his arms crossed over his chest. He listened, Beth said softly. He didn't judge me. I wouldn't have judged you either, I said, my voice breaking. If you'd just talked to me instead of running to him. I didn't know how, she cut in, her voice desperate. And by the time I realized what I was doing, I was in too deep. Damien was my outlet, Mark. My escape. Escape from what? I snapped. Me. Our life. Our kids. Her lips trembled as fresh tears spilled over. No. From myself. From this feeling of being invisible, of being trapped in a role I didn't know how to play anymore. I felt my anger falter, replaced by something colder, heavier. So you made him your confidant, I said, quieter now. Your partner in, whatever this is. And you expect me to just believe it stopped there? It did, Damien interjected, stepping forward. Whatever you think happened between us, it didn't. I would never cross that line. I turned to him, my hands clenching into fists. You already did the moment you decided to keep this from me. You don't get to play the noble bystander here. Beth grabbed my arm, her touch light but insistent. Please, Mark. I need you to believe me. Nothing physical happened. I came here for the photos, for the conversations, but I always came home to you. Always. Her words hung between us, fragile and pleading. I searched her face for the truth, for some sign that she wasn't lying, but all I saw was pain. Damien cleared his throat, his voice measured. Mark, I've made mistakes, but I swear to you, I never tried to take Beth away from you. I saw how much she loves you, how much she wanted to fix things. That's why I didn't say anything. She wanted to work through this on her own terms. The room felt stifling, the air heavy with unspoken truths and missteps. I turned away from them both, my gaze falling on the broken lamp. It looked like how I felt, cracked open, impossible to repair. I don't know how to believe either of you, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I came here looking for answers, but all I've found are more lies. Beth took a tentative step closer. Mark, please. I love you. I've never stopped loving you. I turned to her, the weight of everything crushing down on me. Love isn't supposed to feel like this, Beth. Her face crumpled, and she reached for me again, but I stepped back. I need time, I said. Time to figure out what's real and what's not. Damien said nothing, his expression grim as I walked past him and out the door. The rain was still falling as I stepped into the night, its cold sting a small comfort against the storm raging inside me. The rain soaked through my clothes as I stood outside the studio, my breath clouding in the cold night air. The pounding in my chest echoed the rhythm of the downpour, each drop a reminder of the mess I'd just walked out of. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, confusion, and a stubborn thread of love that refused to unravel no matter how tightly I tried to pull it apart. I didn't know how long I stood there before the door creaked open behind me. I didn't turn. "Mark." Beth's voice was tentative, soft, almost swallowed by the rain. "What more is there to say?" I asked without looking at her. Her footsteps approached cautiously. "I didn't want you to leave like this. You think this is what I wanted?" I turned to face her, my voice rising over the storm. "To be here, drenched in the rain, questioning everything about my marriage?" Her eyes brimmed with tears again, her shoulders trembling. "I don't know how to make you believe me," she said, her voice cracking. "But I swear to you, I never wanted to lose you." "Then why did you go to him?" I demanded, my frustration spilling over. "Why couldn't you come to me, Beth? Was I not enough?" "It wasn't about you not being enough," she said quickly. "It was about me. I've felt lost for years, and I didn't know how to tell you without sounding selfish or broken." "So you turned to a man who wasn't your husband," I said, the bitterness lacing every word. Beth took a step closer, and I could see the rain dripping from her hair, mixing with her tears. "Damien was a mistake. I see that now. I thought he could help me see myself again, but I should have realized the only person who could do that was me." Her words hung in the air, sincere but hollow. I wanted to believe her, but the cracks she'd left in my trust were too deep. "Do you have any idea what this has done to me?" I said, my voice breaking despite myself. "I've spent weeks wondering if I was the problem, if I was blind to something right in front of me. And now I don't know if I can even look at you without seeing him." Beth's face crumpled, and she reached out, her hand brushing against my arm. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right," she whispered. "Please, Mark. I can't lose you." I stared at her, the woman I'd built a life with, the mother of my children, and felt the weight of the choice before me. Forgiveness or finality? Rebuilding or walking away? "You can't undo this," I said finally. "Even if I wanted to forgive you, it's not something that can be erased. Trust doesn't work that way." "I know," she said, her voice small. "But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it back." The sincerity in her eyes was undeniable, but so was the pain she'd caused. I couldn't decide, not here, not now. "I need time, Beth," I said, stepping back. "Time to think. To figure out if there's anything left worth saving." Her lip quivered, but she nodded, her hands clutching her coat as if it were the only thing holding her together. "Take all the time you need," she said, her voice barely audible. "But please, don't shut me out completely." I didn't answer. I turned and walked to my car, the rain masking the tears that blurred my vision. As I drove away, the studio's lights faded in my rearview mirror, but the shadows of what had happened there followed me. The road blurred as the rain hammered against the windshield, the rhythmic sweep of the wipers doing little to clear the haze. My thoughts churned as relentlessly as the storm outside, every word Beth had said looping endlessly in my mind. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that everything she'd done had come from a place of confusion and pain, not malice. But how could I? Trust wasn't just cracked, it was shattered, like the lamp in Damien's studio, a mess of jagged edges that couldn't be pieced back together. The hotel came into view, its neon sign flickering against the rain-drenched night. I pulled into the lot, cut the engine, and sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The world outside was quiet compared to the storm raging inside me. Finally, I stepped out into the rain, letting it soak me as I trudged inside. The clerk at the front desk barely glanced up as I passed, his disinterest a strange comfort. In the room, I dropped into the chair by the window and stared out at the rain-streaked glass. I thought of the photographs Damien had shown me, of Beth's face in those images, open, vulnerable, and undeniably beautiful. It wasn't the face of a liar or a schemer. But then, what was it? My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen. Beth. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something made me pick it up. Mark. Her voice was soft, hesitant. What is it? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. I know I said I'd give you time, she began, but I need to tell you something before you make up your mind. Then say it, I said. There was a pause, the sound of her shaky breath audible over the line. The photos weren't just for me. They were supposed to be for you too. For me. I frowned, confused. I thought if I could see myself the way I used to be, the way you used to look at me, it might fix things. That's why I asked Damien to take them. But somewhere along the way, I lost control. Her voice cracked. I didn't cross the line, Mark. I swear I didn't. But I let myself get too close to it. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I was scared, she admitted. Scared you'd see me as weak. Scared you'd think I didn't love you anymore. And do you? The question came out sharper than I intended. Yes, she said immediately, her voice desperate. I love you more than anything. That's why I'm fighting so hard to fix this. I know I messed up, Mark. I know I hurt you. But I need you to understand that it wasn't because I stopped loving you. It was because I stopped loving myself. Her words hit me harder than I expected, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I don't know if I can do this, Beth, I said finally, my voice low. I don't know if I can put the pieces back together. Then let me try, she said. Let me show you that we're worth saving. Please, Mark. The line went quiet, her plea hanging in the air like a fragile thread. I'll think about it, I said, the only promise I could make. Her breath hitched, a quiet sound of hope. That's all I ask. As the call ended, I stared at the phone in my hand. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that we could fix what was broken. But another part wondered if some things, once shattered, were better left on the floor. The morning light crept through the window, muted by the heavy gray clouds that still loomed over the town. I hadn't slept, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a storm that refused to break. Beth's voice lingered in my mind, her plea circling back again and again, let me show you that we're worth saving. I sat on the edge of the bed, the room around me quiet save for the faint hum of the air conditioner. In my hands was one of the photos I'd taken from Damien's studio the night before, folded and creased from where I'd clenched it too tightly. It was Beth, her eyes meeting the camera with a vulnerability that was almost unbearable to look at. There was something in her expression that made her seem like a stranger and yet achingly familiar, a reflection of the woman I'd fallen in love with and the woman she was now. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. This time, it wasn't Beth. The caller ID read Mom. I answered, my voice hoarse. Hey, Mom. Mark, she said, her tone careful. How are you holding up? I exhaled, leaning back against the headboard. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out if any of this can be salvaged. There was a pause before she spoke again. I don't know the full story, and I won't pretend to. But I've seen the way you look at Beth, and the way she looks at you. Whatever she's done, it's clear she still loves you. She has a strange way of showing it, I muttered. Love isn't always perfect, Mark, Mom said gently. But that doesn't mean it's not worth fighting for. Her words settled over me, and I closed my eyes. Thanks, Mom, I said after a moment. I'll figure it out. After we hung up, I stared at the photo in my hand again, searching for answers in Beth's expression. I wasn't ready to forgive her, not yet. But I wasn't ready to give up on us either. By the time I pulled into the driveway of our home, the rain had stopped, leaving the world outside damp and subdued. Beth was sitting on the porch steps, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she saw me, she stood, her eyes searching mine. "You came back," she said, her voice tentative. "For now," I replied, my tone measured. She nodded, her gaze falling to the ground. "I know I have a lot to make up for, Mark. And I don't expect it to happen overnight. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I stepped closer, holding out the folded photo. Her eyes widened as she took it, her fingers trembling slightly. "Do you see her?" I asked. Beth looked at the image, her lips pressing together as tears welled in her eyes. "I see her," she whispered. "She's still there," I said, my voice softening despite myself. "But you're the only one who can bring her back." Beth looked up at me, her expression filled with a mix of hope and sorrow. "Will you let me try?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. "This isn't going to be easy," I said finally. "For either of us." "I know," she said, her voice steady now. "But I'll do everything I can to prove that I'm still the woman you fell in love with." The silence between us wasn't as heavy this time. It felt fragile, but also full of possibility, a tentative step towards something new. As we stood there on the porch, I realized that the real question wasn't whether we could go back to the way things were. It was whether we could build something stronger from the pieces that remained. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt like the answer might be yes. The end.